Hello everybody and welcome to the latest round of the World Sportscar Championship as we travel across the pond to the eastern part of America. It's Watkins, Glen for round number 3 in the latest of a series of 90-minute races here, making up the very first World Sportscar Championship. Hello everybody, welcome to RaceSpotTV. My name is Ewan Leary alongside Anjuna Kankipai for round number 3 of this championship. It's been exciting to start with. We started off our season back at Sebring. We've been to Le Mans. Now we take on Watkins Glen for the first of 3 American races this season. We've still got Monza, Spa and Daytona to come before we round out the year and the World Sportscar Championship for the very first time here in this series. Let's see where the championship standings are now after a couple of rounds here. At the moment is Nathan Moore leading the way. Points gap's not very big at the moment as there's been 2 consistent races from the top 2 or 3. Jürgen Frank only 6 points back with Thomas King in third. Daniel Sedley, Matthew Gudger-Thompson and Pierce Pryor round at the top 6. Christoph Weltz is 7th ahead of Nicholas Heider and Corentin Guinez, both SimRC drivers who've had 1 good race and 1 not so good race. Gergely Consabo rounds out the LMP3 Pros. Your Just Boomeister is the LMP3 AM Championship leader ahead of Mac Farquhar. Then it's John Roberts and Andy Jones, all separated by just 6 points. Silas Craig Vrolik is not too far away in 5th. Baron Glover is in 6th place ahead of Ben Gregory and Paul Judge Cliss, 2 are tied on points, with Toby Ward and Denise Pope rounding up the top 10 in GT3 Pro. In LMP3 Pro. In GT4 Pro, it is Eric Grove ahead of Michael Hafliderson, then Matthew Crisp, only 16 points back. Richard Simnor and Jack Osborne round out the top 5 with the very unlucky, I've got to say, Andy Shields so far this season down in 6th. Christopher Smith is 7th ahead of Guy Edwards, then it's Rafael Drazask and Paul Zanettacci to round out the top 10 in GT4 Pro. And then finally in GT4 AM, it's a big lead for Josh Boot. He's got 17 points over Evangelos Natavas, and then it is Jack Wilkins and Howard Hassan. Adam Locke is in fifth ahead of RaceSpot's very own Paul Smith. Jeroen Kaiser, Matty Weld, Haflider Johansson and Gary McFarlane all bizarrely tied on 20 points after 2 rounds so far of this season. Qualifying has just come to a close here, Arjuna. We're at Watkins Glen. It's a tight and twisty circuit. Traffic's going to be difficult. We're in for an exciting 90 minutes.
I think so, and of course, with this specific combination of LMP3 and GT4, the GT4 cars having ABS and traction control, they'll be able to attack some of the corners maybe a little bit more aggressively on braking, but then of course with the higher speed sweepers, the downforce of the LMP3 car comes into play. It's going to be very interesting to see how traffic management plays out as the drivers work their way for a 90-minute race.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, but it was very early on the iRacing schedule, the first time the LMP3 was brought out back in Season 3, and it was carnage around here at Watkins Glen. I do feel like the interaction has got a bit better between these two classes of cars, and in this series, it's been fantastic so far, I've got to say, but you just never know what you're going to see around here at Watkins Glen. Qualifying is pretty much complete. We're just about to step forward into the race. 90 minutes as always. Let's have a look at the grid before we get there. It's a Sim RC front row with Jürgen Frank and Corentin Guinez, Thomas King nearly half a second back with Nicholas Heider, Mathieu Gunther, Taunton and Piers Pryor both half second back as well, lining up on row 3. It's a Sim RC domination at the front of the field. Christoph Weitz and Gergely Consabo round out the 8 LMP3 pros here for the starting grid. In LMP3 AM, Mac McFarquhar is leading the way, just 6 tenths ahead of Joy Boomeister. Then it is Ben Gregory and Toby Ward on row 2 with Denise Pope and Andy Booth rounding out row 3. 7th will be Nicholas Salaprutis with Paul Joseph Gliss 2.1 seconds back, and Anton Oman rounding out the 9 LMP3 AM, so 17 in all to make their way through on the GT4s, who line up like this. Eric Grove on the front again, but this time only by 33 thousandths. Jack Osborne, Richard Simnor and Ben Palmer are all within a tenth, with Matthew Crisp and Andy Shield rounding out the 3rd row. Shield, of course, looking for a bit better luck this time around than he has had at Sebring and Le Mans. On the next row of the grid, it's Michael Hafliderson, then it's Jaroslav Sebula alongside Christopher Smith and Johnny Slater round out the top 10, with Guy Edwards and Paul Zanatachi to line up on row 6. Then in the 7th row, Paddy Faulkner and Jonathan Walker line up there, and Rafael Drajas is somewhat surprisingly down at the back in 15th position. Then we've got the GT4 AMs. It's Lee Berridge who's taken a somewhat surprise pole by 61 thousandths ahead of Josh Boot. Jeroen Kaiser and Howard Hassan line up on row 2 with Matty Wild and Philip Bjork on row 3. Adam Locke is just over half a second back as well, ahead of Jack Wilkins. Then it's RaceSpot's own Paul Smith and Gary McFarlane, the first driver, more than a second back. Evangelos Nefasas is in the 11th ahead of Haflider Johansson, who's a long way down compared to his charity position. Caleb Ruddock rounds out the top 13 in the 13 car grid, I should say, for the GT4 AMs. Safe to say that there are a few more GT4s on the grid than LMP3s at this stage in the season, but that shouldn't make the traffic any easier. The big notable thing from qualifying there for me, Arjuna, is the Sim RC domination we've got at the front. 3 in the top 4 for them. And
it will be interesting, with draft being such a significant factor at a track like this, how they'll be able to work together to potentially have some advantage. Christoph Weitz at the back of that LMP3 Pro class does have to work his way on forward. I will say, to your point on more LMP3 than GT4 machines, it actually is a little bit realistic, right? Isn't it, Ewan? That feels like modern sports car racing, and so, well, I'm really excited to see how we're going to get on here. I've not really been keeping too close an eye on the World Sports Car Championship, but I've commentated on my fair share of the World GT Championship. I always know we're going to see some relentless racing.
Yeah, that's very true, by the way, about what you mentioned with LMP3s and GT4s. I think it's fair to say that there are a few GT4s hanging about in real life than there are LMP3s, and that's generally what we see in these series as well. As I say, so far the World Sports Car Championship has seen some pretty good interactions actually between LMP3 and GT4 traffic, and we hope that doesn't change here today. It should be a good evening of racing, but yet to see how it's quite going to turn out with the traffic and so on. As I mentioned, 17 LMP3s, but well over 20 GT4s on the grid here tonight. There is a split start, of course, but it's it's going to feel like there's a lot of traffic for those LMP3s to negotiate. In terms of the championship, we're not too far deep into this one so far. It's only round 2 of 6 so far, and we've still got a very, very long way to go. But you can't really afford to fall behind very much. No drop weeks in this series, of course. And there are plenty of points available on each particular evening, especially for pole position and fastest lap, actually. Those points will be pretty crucial by the end of the season. But for now, it's just about accumulating them as many as you can, and somewhat about getting to the end, because some strong drivers have had difficult races and they found themselves a long way down this early in the season. Yeah,
and it's a short season as well, isn't it? Just the 6 rounds, and Monza, Spa and Daytona. I mean, these are all tracks where chaos can somewhat be expected, Ewan, with the relatively high speeds that will bring in the LMP3 and GT4 machines.
Certainly through the corners, these LMP3s are going to be planted around this new configuration of Watkins Glen. I'd say new, it's quite old now since it was repaved, wasn't it? But even so, the prototypes very much enjoying their lower ride height these days that they get to run around here. Around the final corner they come. It's the World Sports Car Championship here, round 3 from Watkins Glen, and another 90-minute race is set to get underway to take us to the halfway mark in this season. The green flag is in hand and it waves as we bring the field to green, and Sim RC will dominate the front of the field. They qualify with 3 in the first 4, and they're going to be challenged into turn 1, not by Piers Pryor, who just stays in behind in the pink and white. He gets shuffled back to 7th, arguably, and one of the Sim RCs, I think it's Nicholas Hyder, has dropped down to 5th place early on in this start. So far they're also coming under a little bit of pressure from those just in behind, but it's single file on the run up the hill. Sometimes a very dangerous run through the S's, but the LMP3s at least have made it through cleanly.
Still waiting for those GT4s to take the start, and now blasting into that outer loop, almost 3 wide they go, but it's Sim RC 1 and 2. Here come the GT4s plunging down towards the 90.
It's another start from the front for Eric Grove in the Aston Martin. A good start it is as well for him. Jürgen Frank has taken that inspiration as well and held on to the lead in LMP3, of course. It does seem as well that the GT4s have gotten through relatively cleanly. Now, oh no, spoke too soon, into the wall, and there's a big pile up at the top of the hill. Let's hope everybody else gets through cleanly, and I think, oh no, not for the most part, unfortunately. 3 or 4 have gotten caught up in that. It's the classic Watkins Glen pile-up.
And I think maybe 7 cars getting really bad damage, but quite interestingly, plenty of others able to get on through, and they're almost 3 wide heading out of the outer loop, but now diving down towards the boot section. The GT4s enters, the LMP3s exiting and getting ready to finish the end of lap number 1.
And it's gone to Guinez who's under the pressure. It was Nicholas Hyder who dropped back to 5th place, by the way. But Guinez is under quite a lot of pressure right now from the likes of Thomas King and Taunton as well. Matthew Gunter Taunton, who's in that 4th place at the moment. But Jürgen Frank has held on to this lead quite nicely. He's got nearly a second over the rest of the field. Thankfully, the GT4s are long gone and well clear by the time that the LMP3s get over the hill for the second time. But it's Frank who leads the way. Guinez who's got all the pressure as they'll make their way towards the faster configuration of the outer loop. No chicane today, of course.
Just taking a look at the timing screen, looks like Jaroslav Sabula and Rafael Joust, the 2 Semper Racing cars, getting tangled up through the S's. That's not ideal for them. We'll have to try and figure out through what I'm sure is going to take several replays what all unfolded. First, what was the first instigating battle, and then after that, who all piled into the fun. We can start to take a look at it here. It does begin with Jaroslav Sabula in the Semper Racing car pancaking into the wall.
Yeah, it was side by side with one of the Mercedes that I think maybe thought they were clear, and then there was that clip there at the end. A good few cars actually did get through quite nicely, but then there was one that just clipped it, and it created a mass pile-up in the background. There's the onboard, and it's not a nice place to be back here in the Mercedes. Thankfully, this one ending up to the side of the road and doesn't get hit by anybody further on from that. But what a mess that was as Guinez goes wide at the top of the hill there. That was through turn 9. Thankfully not for him anyway, not coming under any pressure into the final 2 corners, but he's continuing to back the field up.
Wonder how much right now Corentin Guinez is holding up Thomas King. If 35 can get to the inside, down in towards the opening corner. Will we see the change of positions? Guinez blocks to the wall, jinks back to the outside, but you can tell there's intent to hold on to the spot.
Yes, it certainly is, and it could be a real problem for everybody now. as they all catch up. There's GT4 traffic already as well. This doesn't normally happen in the first 5 minutes, but that's what we're seeing right now. Greenez with a decent run, but I don't think the run quite from those behind is going to be good enough. Nicholas Hyder sits behind. Taunton is there, and well, I say that, the slipstream for King is fantastic. He's now down the inside on the way in towards the outer loop. He's not quite committed enough though. Round the outside for Greenez. What a run it was as well. He stays in that third place, or second place, excuse me, for the moment. King has to stay behind. That outside line is actually a bit stronger than I imagined it would be at the outer loop.
I think you can definitely tell as well that Gunez wants the track position right now, does not want to let the teammates cycle on through and close up the margin to Jürgen Frank, who is almost out of drafting range, and that might be crucial to be able to break the toe. Maybe heading into the first cycle through of traffic, because we always know that's the most aggressive. There's a bit of a look there from Hyder, but backs out of it. GT4's down into turn number 1.
They are, and it's Eric Grove still leading the way. Palmer just behind in the 111. Ben Palmer has not had a great start to the season so far. The reason, by the way, you won't have seen him on the standings because he's 11th, and we only did the top 10. That kind of says all you need to know about what has gone on for him so far. He's staying in the slipstream for now. It's become a little bit more draft heavy with the omission of this chicane, and so he can just sit there for the moment. The battle's on for 4th place, though. That's Andy Shield trying to make up a place on one of the Porsche Caymans into 4th, but that's not quite going to happen on this occasion. Shield having to stay behind from Osborne. It is in the 91 who is in that position for now. Jack Osborne holding 4th for now. But the top 5 are staying together pretty much. The GT4's just sort of fearing, I guess, that first run through traffic. Hopefully nothing comes of that, but even so, it will be a worry for them before they can really settle down in this race.
Yeah, you can already tell the margin at the front's come down to within that second, so with the pace maybe starting to equalize a little bit more now, the tires have bedded in as well. You have to wonder how that will play on out. Bit of a mistake potentially from Thomas King as well, because he's lost margin to Gunez.
Yeah, and continuing to do so as well. Yeah, it's a much bigger gap. Now down the inside of one of the Mercedes, a fairly late one down the inside on the 81. In towards the toe of the boot, if you like, as we like to call it, of course. Now up the hill and over the crest. Now we're into the traffic properly. Down the hill in towards the hill. This is turn 8 of Watkins Glen. Under a lot of pressure from his teammate here for third. Now what do? Well, they go off the road down there at turn 8. That's not ideal. Now up the hill towards 9. The Sim RC guys with a 1 and 2, and it's getting an even more secure 1 and 2 by the moment as well. Traffic now coming into effect at Watkins Glen. Greenez 2 seconds behind his teammate, but he's getting that way ahead of the rest of the field as well.
Yeah, that's the more important thing, right? The margin being built up behind. Lost a bit of time out of the final corner. Can see that Christoph Weitz has been able to latch on to the back of these top 6 machines, and could very well end up being a Sim RC. 1, 2, 3, 4 if they play things out properly. Big check up off of turn number 1 as they rise their way up through the S's once more.
That was unideal, is what I call that. Nicholas Hardy getting really close to Gonier Taunton there for 4th. He's almost too close now. He had to go round the outside, or at least look round the outside at turn 4, where you have a longer route and no slipstream. Now he's going to do it on the straight, which is a lot more successful of a choice, although Taunton, of course, has his teammate giving him slipstream. Round the outside goes Hyder. He tries to at the outer loop, and what an attempt it was as well. A really long way around there, of course, a high-speed corner like that, and it wasn't quite possible that time around. Hyder stays behind. Oh no, there's chaos. Greenez goes around, he loses his rear wing and engine cover as one of the McLarens is turned around at turn 6.
I'm not exactly sure who it is. It might be Jack Wilkins, excuse me. But goodness gracious me, Ewan, chaos down on the entry to the boot, and it means Jürgen Frank has broken away in what is still a Sim RC 1 and 2, yes, but with a very different complexion.
Oh no, and King is off the road as well. He's got caught up in this. He's got damage as well. Pierce Pryor goes through in the pink and white, and he's now challenging Taunton just behind his Kun Sabo as well in the 11. He makes his way around into 6th place. So this is now a disaster really for both Guinness and King. Let's see what happened on the way in towards turn 6. It's the McLaren that starts it all off. Oh no, it's a mistake from Guinness, really. He gets straight into the back of the McLaren, and then Guinness is hit by King, who gets damage from that himself. Guinness, of course, with the most visual damage of all, but King will have to be on pit lane as well. What a shame that is for the McLaren driver. I'm afraid down here at turn 6, it's just a careless error almost from Corentin Guinness.
I think it was also a bit fooled by the McLaren going a bit wide, and there you can just see the chaos that is instigated there, and steering damage clearly for Thomas King as well. We're curious to see what race control has to say about that one, but my goodness me, that's some strong contenders taken out, and as you said, Thomas King straight down to the pit lane.
Oh, round the outside again from Taunton it is, as he's challenged here by Green. No, it's not. It's, excuse me, it's another one of the white and yellow and black cars, and they're 3 wide in towards turn 6. My goodness me, Piers Pryor right on the inside. Oh, and the side-to-side contact there with Christoph Weitz, who really did not want to get caught behind those GT4s and drove straight into the side of Pryor. Surely that's going to be looked upon quite disdainfully. And there's chaos behind as well. As soon as the traffic begins, the cars start going off the road, and that's happened to a few cars at the exit of turn 5.
That was Denise Pope as well as Johnny Slater, I believe, getting tangled up. But like you say, chaos, and we know Watkins can be difficult with the multi-class interaction, just given the high-speed nature of the track. But, well, there's drivers taking plenty of risks today, that is for sure.
Yeah, we'll see what happened in that incident down here at turn 5. The LMP3s, of course, so much more downforce that they have available to them, and it's just a bit of a clip there from one of the LMP3s as they try and squeeze down on the GT4. Now I'm hoping nobody else gets involved here, because that Mercedes was in a very precarious position. You can see it here from the air, as the LMP3s are trying to battle, of course, with one another. One tries to go around the outside, and the GT4s just can't hold that tight of a line. They've got to drift out wide. They don't have the aerodynamic downforce of the Ligiers, and unfortunately that kind of contact was a bit inevitable.
Ooh.
And then it's a rejoin. Oh, no. It's a rejoin straight into the path of a big battle and a big clump of cars, and I'm afraid that incident got a lot worse than it really didn't need to be.
So Denise Pope was the innocent LMP3. I'm still trying to figure out, it might have been Jus Boomister, that was the other of the LMP3s. Here's the perspective from Pope, and you have a relative box here on iRacing. You've got to use it. I know the first instinct is to get out of harm's way, but that's not pretty, that's for sure.
No, certainly not, and certainly putting himself in harm's way, as you say there. So a real shame for Denise Pope and everyone else who's been caught up in that, to be honest, because it was a real multi-car incident in the end. Somehow the GT4 Pro and GT4 AM leaders actually have stayed together quite well through this. Eric Grove and Ben Palmer are still 1 and 2, with Richard Simnor still 3rd, then Jack Osborne 4th, but Andy Shield is now a long way back all over again. I have a feeling for the 3rd race in a row he's had a bit of bad luck. He's now 15 seconds adrift of the class leaders and down in 10th position as the LMP3 AM leader Ben Gregory gets through the field. He's got a much bigger lead now than he previously did before all of that, because and it's only growing as well now. Nearly 9 seconds at the end of only 12 minutes.
This is a healthy margin to enjoy. Not even 13 minutes into a race, isn't it? Gonna have some traffic exiting off of pit road as Denise Pope returns to the racing surface. But for Ben Gregory, all he needs to focus on right now, extend this margin, keep the rhythm going, and stay out of the trouble, because as we've seen today, Ewan, it doesn't necessarily have to be you making the mistakes. Sometimes you get brought into the madness of someone else.
Yeah. It's not always your own driving that gets you unstuck. It's sometimes other people, as much as we wouldn't like it to be. So, 13 minutes just about gone. Jürgen Frank leads in LMP3 Pro. We'll just calm down for a minute and take stock of the leaders. Ben Gregory is leading by just over 10 seconds with Ward in second. Eric Grove is leading in GT4 Pro, and the only leader we haven't seen so much of so far is Lee Berridge, who is leading in GT4 AM, and that's a conversion of pole position, of course, ahead of Josh Boot, who's won both races so far in GT4 AM, including taking massive points on some of the others in some of the previous rounds. He, of course, leads ahead of Natafas in the GT4 AM category. but so far not leading the way here in this one, but only just a second back. It is quite remarkable how the GT4 racers have stayed so close, whereas the LMP3s really haven't.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes these GT4s are, as many drivers will say, more interesting and put on better racing than GT3s, so maybe we shouldn't be too surprised. There have been a fair number of casualties, I think it is fair to say, though, in this GT4 class. Sabula, Raphael Joust, Johnny Slater, those were all, of course, on the opening couple of laps. Jerome Kaiser's just headed down towards the pit lane, and Paul Smith, RaceSpot's own, has just emerged after a 37-second stop, so plenty of GT4s have been involved in the wars.
Yeah, unfortunately, they certainly have, and that same could be said, I guess, across the categories. Paul Smith down in 12th, by the way, for RaceSpotTV. There he is, getting overtaken by a couple of the LMP3s. I think that's Kunsabo trying to get through on Christoph Weitz at the moment for 4th place, just in the foreground there for LMP3. Just in case you're wondering, Paul Smith is down in 6th place in the championship standings for the GT4 AMS. We'll be keeping an eye on him, of course, as we have a look at Piers Pryor now, who's trying to make his way through on Christoph Weitz. So Kunsabo is clearly a little bit further back than that. He's in 6th place. It's Pryor who's trying to get through, and this has been interesting, really, for me. He said he said to us after Sebring anyway, this is his first round properly sort of concentrating and really practicing for, or his first championship series, I should say. He's really practiced for hard since the pandemic years, really, of 2020 and so on. So it's quite a return to sim racing, back to the sport, I guess, if you like, for him. And he did a really good job at Sebring. Very nearly got to the race win. Had a bit of bad luck at Le Mans, got caught up in an incident. And unfortunately at Watkins Glen, the pace doesn't quite seem to be there as it has been in other weeks. I know he's been caught behind stuff already, but he is 13 seconds off of the race lead in a quarter of an hour. And he's down in 5th place as well, which wouldn't have been seen or wouldn't have been likely, really, at Sebring or Le Mans, where he did seem a little bit pacier.
Don't forget, though, that he had to check up for all of that madness that we've seen, and so would have lost some time through the course of that. Only Nicholas Hyder really didn't lose too much ground, and he's up in 2nd. Last time, Piers Pryor was actually quicker, only a couple of hundredths, though, than Jürgen Frank, the race leader, and so as he slides on through on Christoph Weitz, jukes his way up into the top 4. I think this is where now for Pryor, before the pit stops begin, we'll see if he can close that gap up to a 20 machine. It's 3 and a bit seconds, which is going to take some time to close, but see how it goes, because I feel like the pit stop windows here, Ewan, with a relatively short pit lane, it's all going to be about who exits into clean air.
It is. The pit stops are going to be very important, as you say, and that's kind of what these races are shaped around sometimes, if you like. It's what keeps these ones very interesting right to the very final stops. It played a huge role at Sebring, actually, in giving, well, I don't say giving Nathan Moore the win, because that would be totally unfair, but it certainly helped him along the way. It gave him the track position on the way out of the final stops of that race. And he was able to hold on to that track position after that as well. Less of a role at Le Mans, admittedly, but even so, you need to get it right around all of these circuits, and that has to be the case around here as well. Eric Grove is still leading in GT4 Pro, but what a battle it still is. Ben Palmer, Richard Simnell, Jack Osborne, all still very close in attendance. Unfortunately, Andy Shield no longer there. As we mentioned earlier, he's dropped to 10th position in the field now. But it's been an interesting opening for GT4 Pro. It does feel like we're waiting for those first pit stop phases, really, because slipstream, as you mentioned earlier, is going to be a factor, and some of them are certainly playing with that at the moment. Yeah,
I think we're definitely just waiting now to see who's been saving fuel and who's going to have a slightly shorter pit stop when we work our way down onto the lane. Plenty more dramas, by the way. That's a big off and slamming back onto track and then making more contact. That was Anton Oman. Not sure who necessarily made the subsequent contact there, but a high-speed hit down at the boot.
A real shame. Don't like to see this kind of thing. It's just a little bit of grass on the way in, not really, just a lot too much speed, really. Straight into the wall, and the tyre walls are quite springy, and straight into the scene of the accident. Unfortunately, another couple of the LMP3s, which I imagine both have damage after that as well. A very attritional start to this race. In fact, I think there's only 3 LMP3 AMS who haven't been caught up in something so far. And given there's, 9 of them, That is quite a remarkable record. Already one retirement in that class as well.
That was Nick Salaputis, by the way, if you were curious. So unfortunately, the 26 has made a duck down to the pit lane. Ewan, do these drivers have a fast repair? Because it does seem like a lot of them come into pit lane and then leave pit lane with a pretty new car pretty quickly.
I wasn't aware of any fast repairs, no, in the rule set. And the phrase is not in the rules, so I'm guessing not. I've just searched for them, as you can tell.
Well,
but
maybe
yeah,
it's just a very quick repair on the front wing of front nose of an LMP3 car.
Yeah, I say that. Just because it's not in the rules doesn't mean it wasn't announced after the previous races. I do remember Piers Pryor being quite a long way off the back after his incident at Le Mans. However, that could have been just tow time because they're obviously bigger at Le Mans, depending on where you crash. So it's possible. I will investigate, but yeah, it's possible that they do have one. We have seen some fairly short pit stops, although for the likes of Burmeister, that he's still in the pit lane at the moment, and that's been quite a while. But you are right, there's been some very short ones so far this evening. We'll investigate that. Lee Berridge is still leading in GT4, and though thankfully these GT4 classes have been slightly less ripped apart by this, Josh Boot is still right there though, and this is already worrying for the championship because the GT4s in Pro and Am, and in both classes this is the case, they take points from the same tree, if you like. The top 30 get points in both classes, and that doesn't divide itself between Pro and Am. It's just a whole class point system, and that means Boot can put a lot of drivers between himself and his nearest AM rivals and put a lot of points into his rivals in one race as well. So it's a real good thing for him, especially because of his recent success in these first two races. Boot, he's won the first two, and obviously that's going to give him the championship lead, but it's given him a bigger one than he would otherwise have, if that makes any sense at all.
No, it does, and that's the thing that always makes it interesting, right, when you split them up into Pro and Am, but combine the points on track together. They have the incentive to be fighting wheel to wheel with cars that are of the same speed, but maybe scored in the championship slightly differently. That, by the way, by Lee Berridge. Have you ever seen a car cover to the inside as aggressively on a prototype making a move to the inside?
Well, no. It's not often seen at all, to be honest. You generally try to avoid it, but I can see why. I mean, he's in a really difficult position here, isn't he, Lee Berridge, at the moment? He's stuck right behind one of the pro cars. That's Sky Edwards just in front in the 55 BMW for RD Simsport, and it's a real problem because you kind of want to get involved, but it is a pro car. They're not quite in your class. They're sort of there. They are, you would take points, but you're not really worrying about that for the moment. It's a very difficult place to be, especially with Boot so close and traffic coming up as well. It's a horrible place to be, really.
It is terrible sometimes, just being stuck in the middle of the pack, and that's one of those Sim RC cars. That's your race leader, Jürgen Frank, and so lost a bit of ground there. We'll keep the margin back to Nicholas Hyder relatively constant, but why do I get the sense that both LMP3 leads are pretty comfortable right now, but we're going to have to keep an eye on both of the GT4 battles?
We are, and that's a relatively rare phenomenon, really, that we've got no battles in one class, but all of them in another. Was that smoke in the background on the front straight? I hope that wasn't people crashing into one another. But might have been just me saying things. But
might have just been stuff from pit lane.
Okay, that's true as well. Apologies for that. Eric Grove still leads the way in Pro, though, and there's slightly less movement here, slightly less urgency, it feels like. Berridge doesn't look entirely comfortable with his position at the front of GT4 Pro, but since he's been here so often, Eric Grove looks really quite comfortable in this position in GT4 Pro.
You say comfortable, but all it takes is one moment to...
Oh!
There we go, around the outside. That's the 75. Light flash from Eric Grove, clearly not very happy. And Lee Berridge, the GT4 AM leader, spun through the outer loop. And now Josh Boot has taken the point.
And that's exactly why Berridge looked so anxious almost when he was trying to overtake Guy Edwards. I wonder whether he went for it and it didn't come off or something else was at play. There's LMP3s around here again. It's a very late move. I'm not sure whether there was contact or whether it was just the reaction that ended up spinning him around. But thankfully he wasn't collected because he was in the middle of the road all over again.
Well, look from up above and see if we can get a clearer perspective of whether there's a healthy dose of air or so whether the LMP3 does make some contact. I mean, there is a good 2 feet between the two of them. It's not easy to tell, that's for sure. But there's just the pressure that you can always tell that these drivers are feeling, the wiggle to the left on the wheel, and unfortunately the M4 GT4 goes around.
I think, unfortunately, there was no contact there, was there? It was just a bit of a wiggle out the way, or an attempted one, and straight around for the previous leader in GT4 AM. Paul Smith is down on pit lane again for some reason, by the way. That's a shame for him. He's rolling at least and doesn't look damaged, to me anyway. So he seems to be okay, but another pit stop for him. Wondering if there's a different strategy, maybe. By the way, the fuel limit was changed for Le Mans because of the difference in track length, of course, and they didn't want to force it into being a 3-stop maybe for LMP3, which it had a risk at being. However, the race fuel has actually been kept the same for here at Watkins Glen, so clearly they've decided that that rule is maybe worth changing anyway, and maybe we're going to see a few longer stints here. Still don't think that's going to get anyone to a one-stop race over the course of 90 minutes, with 60% for the GT4s and 68% for the LMP3s. That's not long enough to make it into a one-stop, I don't think, for either category. But even so, it gives them a little bit more freedom with that final stop, as they're not quite running almost exactly to the half-hour mark as they were at Sebring.
Well, the thing to remember as well is at a place like Watkins Glen, especially compared to somewhere like Sebring, for example, where you're spending a lot more time full throttle. So we are burning a little bit more fuel just naturally, and so much like with the Circuit de la Sarthe, Monza, Spa and Daytona all coming up, maybe this is just a shift to account for a slightly different sort of a race, and it does not mean that the fuel saving is still not going to be a considerable factor, because every litre of fuel you can save on the track will then be less fuel you need to put into the car, less time in pit lane, which is one of the few things that you can guarantee as being faster than the teams that you're battling against.
Yeah, I think we've already seen a bit of that as well, those fuel gains coming into play, especially here in the front group of GT4 Pro. I think it's already been at play a little bit. Eric Grover's not been doing any of it, of course, still leading. Ben Palmer, Richard Sinmore, and Jack Osborne as well have certainly been making use of that. Now is Sinmore going to push Palmer, or is he going to go through himself? This is an interesting moment as the battle for second starts to ensue. Guggen Sabo is in a horrible place and defending from as well. Free wide through the middle for Consabo. That was aggressive, and so down the inside for Sinmore might not matter anymore anyway. Ben Palmer hangs around the outside as a result. They'll remain side by side on the way towards turn 6. The Mercedes goes in deep, and way too deep it is. Jack Osborne goes through. There was aggression there from Ben Palmer in the 111 Mercedes, and in the end they both paid for it. Down the inside goes Simnor. He does get his place back at least, but that was aggression gone wrong into turn 6.
And you just see how easy it is sometimes to hang back and catch people napping, but unfortunately Jack Osborne now has lost the toe to Eric Grove in that Aston Martin. He'll have to burn a little bit of the fuel that maybe he's been saving over the opening 27 and a bit minutes of this race, but it positions him very nicely now, having gotten up through those two positions. Do note as well, Aston Martin, Porsche, Mercedes, and then BMW's running 6th and 7th. BOP's looking pretty healthy in this GT4 class.
Absolutely. I was going to make the point, actually, you were mentioning the circuits a couple of moments ago. This is a very straight line speed focus schedule, isn't it, really? Based on, this is probably the twist, maybe Sebring, but this and Sebring, twistier tracks, but by no means low speed. And then you've got Le Mans, this is the highest of all speeds, and so is Monza, so is Daytona, and Spa's not exactly slow either. So it's a really, that's got to have factored into the GT4 car selection. Normally I complain when there's a lack of variety, not that we have a lack of variety, by the way, but normally I complain. I wouldn't have complained to even here, because there's so many straight line speed circuits that there's got to be favourable cars for a series like this one. That was quite a close moment out of traffic, though. I think one of the lap down GT4s making its way out of the pit lane after possible damage repair, nearly getting involved in the battle for third. Yeah,
it was Jonathan Walker who was coming out of pit lane, and you can take a look at what happened to send him to the pit lane now, because he's side by side with Caleb Rudock through the penultimate corner. 2 does not go into 1, and around they went, and relatively unscathed, I thought, for the both of them, but keep watching. Is there anything more that comes as they rejoin into oncoming traffic?
No. Oh, wow. That was very close. I thought there was going to be disaster there. that was so close to another one, and we've already seen that once in the last half an hour, haven't we, with a rejoin straight onto the racing line. That would have been not nice to see. Thankfully, the disaster was averted, but goodness me, that was a moment back in GT4. Thankfully, that's all been repaired from now, and I think both of those cars are back in the race again. But not ideal at all. It's been somewhat what we expected really here at Watkins Glen. To be honest, I thought Sebring in this race would be the most focused in terms of traffic and the difficulties that you have in a series like this. However, Watkins Glen has been seriously more incident prone than Sebring was, and that was nearly another one there through the final corner. It was just endless for these drivers in terms of concentration.
The thing with traffic is you're always trying to think ahead. What's going to be happening at the next corner? What should I be doing to be in the right spots there? And there's just some decisions sometimes where it feels like drivers are only thinking about that corner right there and right then. What's happened to Martin Chris? That's parked out at the bottom of the 90. That's a very dangerous place to be spun, and he returns to pit lane from inside the top 5 in the pros.
And inside third place in the GT4 Pro points as well, by the way. A pretty big moment there in that class. We'll have a look at what happened in a few moments' time. But Martin Crisp out of proceedings for now. It's a moment with traffic. And,
oh, no.
Well, I don't know why he's done that particularly. He's tried to go through on the lap car, I think, and it's the same lap car we saw a moment ago, isn't it, the McLaren, and he's just not given any space for the McLaren to come back on there. I don't know why he didn't just drift to the left by a car width, or the right, excuse me.
That is totally self-inflicted. I mean, yes, you understand the desire to, want to try and maximize the momentum on that climb up through the S's, which means having as wide an entry as possible. But yeah, like you say, there's only one direction that McLaren is going. That's back onto the racing surface, and unfortunately, Crispy there has crisped up his car.
Yeah, his car is crisp, as you could say.
It's hard to say, isn't it?
Jonathan Walker was the one, by the way, involved. The McLaren we saw coming out the pit lane a few moments ago. He's a lot further down in the championship, unfortunately, for him. But a real shame. As you mentioned, I do think it was slightly self-inflicted on that occasion. But, I mean, it's the new configuration of Watkins Glen in iRacing these days. It has a lot of tarmac to the left-hand side. That wouldn't have happened 5 years ago, put it that way.
No, it probably still would have happened 5 years ago. I've seen that happen too many times because drivers are always. That would usually happen more if they were racing, on the same lap, kind of a deal. Probably not in a lap car situation. You are right, but yeah, unfortunately, we've seen a lot. We haven't seen regularly scheduled pit stops just yet, which I think has just come to a change.
Yeah, I think Howard Hassan is making a regular one here. It's a bit early, I would say, but I think it's a regular one. 60% fuel for the GT4 should give them around 35 to 40 minutes, I would argue. But as you said earlier, round here at Watkins Glen, you are on full throttle for quite a while, even if it is twisty sometimes. I think, 35, 40 minutes is pretty reasonable for the GT4s. I don't think with a 60% fuel limit, anyone's going to try and stretch it out for a one-stop, though. That would just be really too slow, even if it maybe is possible.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think we're going to see that. That would be asking for a bit much. But, again, it's all just about what you can do with the little windows of fuel that you might have in there. Now, for example, take Ben Palmer tucked up again behind Richard Simner in that Porsche. Will that Mercedes just be saving some fuel and waiting to dive into the pit stop window? That would be my impression, although hanging the rear end out. Definitely still pushing, that's for sure.
They are. Jack Osborne second is now nearly 2 seconds away from the leader, by the way, and it's another second back to Richard Simner and Ben Palmer here who were fighting. They, of course, had that great fight towards turn 6. Greatly entertaining, that is. Not great for their track position or their speed, in fact, as well. They lost about 3 seconds or so in the exchange. Maybe not as much as that, but it was quite a few seconds. And now you can see the Aston Martin of Eric Grove just going through the bottom of shot there. He is a spare distance ahead at this point. We've also got a lapped GT4 in the middle of all this as well. That's going to be quite a problem, not only in terms of LMP3 and GT4 traffic, which we've spoken about at length, but the same class traffic as well, which is sometimes harder to deal with depending on who it is that you're trying to overtake. I think it's Gary McFarlane who's at the front of this battle for the moment and just in the way of Osborne, although he seems to have pulled to the left pretty quickly here and gotten out the way. McFarlane was involved in the lap 1 crash, by the way, if you remember back in GT4, where there was a few slaps on the wall at the top of the hill through turn 4, and a few getting caught up in the pile-up behind as well. McFarlane was one of many who got damage as a result of that. Let's see out the way now. Yes, he is, and it's a teammate just behind as well, so that should all be solved as we get LMP3. This is certainly scheduled pit stops, and they're certainly running out of fuel at this stage, as that McLaren won't make it very far.
Oh, and now trying to back up as well. This is the dance of trying to get iRacing to potentially fix a little bit of damage. But on the battle on pit lane, I think the question's going to become, with these drivers able to go 5 minutes beyond, the McLaren's still working into the lane, 5 minutes beyond the half hour, they hypothetically are only going to need 20 minutes of fuel at the end. Some drivers are going to be trying to make that as short a stop as possible, but I don't think we should necessarily expect it to get shorter than 15 minutes or less.
It would be a stretch to manage that, but then again, it's Jürgen Frank, and he's quite I don't know how to describe him, but quite a frugal, is that the right word, driver, in terms of fuel, tyres and so on. Very experienced, as I keep mentioning. He's probably tired of me saying that, but yeah, he'll be going long on fuel as well as going fast.
I mean, does he mind us bringing up his experience as much as Yuri Kastorp minds us bringing up his height?
I don't know.
I might have been just blocked on Twitter for that comment.
It's just a case of whether you take experience and age hand in hand, and whether you take offence to that or not. But I haven't asked him, to be fair. So anyway,
age is just a number. The oldest competitor at the event I was working, the live event I was working on this past weekend, was 38 years old. You know what he did in the intro videos that they filmed for everyone? Just did a casual backflip. You know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's I wasn't expecting you to say that. That's quite impressive. But yeah, you're right. Age is just a number. So and Jürgen Frank hasn't complained yet either. So it's fine. He makes his way out the pit lane. 17.6 seconds. That's noticeably shorter actually than the two behind for Taunton especially, who I think did 22 or 26. So that's noticeable there. I wonder whether that's because Frank's pit stop is short or Taunton's was long. I would suggest that Frank is maybe a bit shorter, because Nicholas Hyder has gone well towards the half minute. He's still down on pit lane, in fact. Taunton's going to get ahead, but only just.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. This is a track position gamble from Jürgen Frank, and it will probably compromise him slightly towards the end, but I feel like he feels pretty comfortable right now. Not sure if you've been keeping an eye on the gap towards the front there between Hyder and his teammate Frank. It had been closing, albeit slightly, under 3 seconds on occasion as well. Jürgen Frank may be feeling the pressure.
Well, I remember he did this, or Simar C certainly worked around this at Sebring. I think it may have been Frank as well, or it might have been Nicholas Hyder. They were both up there doing shorter stops here and longer ones there. Now, I know the fuel situation is slightly different, but even so, they do like to work the strategy, not quite, filling up all the way on the opening stop. Christoph Weitz has gone longest as well here in LMP3, or one of the longest. Gonzalo has joined him as well as GT4 Pro pit stops begin as well. Just after the LMP3s finish their cycle, they're on their last lap of pitting in LMP3 Pro, and so GT4 Pros begin now, and Eric Grove is the leader, of course, or was the leader. He leads them on to pit lane as well.
There's Whites as well. Like you say, last lap of their cycle is going to slot in just in front of that Aston Martin, who has already been in the box for 23 and a bit seconds and climbing. It's a long pit stop for these cars as well, with the amount of fuel that they are able to pack on in, the fuel flow that they have, all pretty equalized amongst the cars, and so 35 seconds seems to be the benchmark number. We'll now wait to see what the likes of Jack Osborne will do after he went the 1 lap longer. Jürgen Frank has made that pit stop strategy work. Christoph Weitz, 19 seconds on the pit strategy, very similar to his teammate out front.
Has he gained anything as a result, though? Not really. He would have gained time, of course, but he's not gaining any places. He was ahead of Gonzalo before, and I think he was behind prior. He must have been, so it's not ideal in terms of positions at the moment for Weitz, but he is still 6th at least, and now he's probably a little bit closer to those further in front. Thomas King is into 2nd then. It does seem that Nicholas Hyder's longer stop has shoved him down a place or 2, because both of those cars actually have gotten through, both King and Taunton as well, in the GTA Red cars. That's the white and red cars you've been seeing. Piers Pryor, by the way, in the GTA Pink team, as you probably guessed. So they're third and fourth with Hyder. Second and third, then Hyder's fourth in LMP3 Pro as Jack Osborne finishes his lap in the lead, and we'll now hand that over to somebody else. Whether that person is going to be Eric Grove or not still remains to be seen, but you'd imagine it will be. There is the Aston Martin. I think I've seen everybody in front of Grove pit in so far. Certainly Osborne and Smith have.
I don't think that anyone's really going to go beyond this point, because this is, again, a fuel-hungry track, and so I would suspect that Josh Boot indeed coming in from the GT4 AM lead as well. Yeah, and everybody has now made a pit stop. Brain Gregory in the LMP3 class went 23 laps, longest of them all, but not long enough to make this a one-stop race, crucially. Osborne still sitting and waiting as the time ticks above 30 seconds in the box. The Aston Martin out of the final corner and heading off towards the line.
So, over the line for Grove. They are going to hit the line pretty much at the same time, but obviously Grove is going at a much higher speed here, and Osborne is going to be nowhere near. I think it's going to be an even bigger gap, actually, than it was not so long ago. There's been changes in that battle for third as well, as Osborne is feeling a lot more secure in that position. Richard Simnor is side by side with him as well. Simnor just gets out ahead, or stays at, well, yeah, gets ahead, I should say, getting into second position. Then it's Osborne in third, and further back is at the 111 of Ben Palmer in fourth, just 1.2 seconds further back, but the gap to Eric Grove is obvious, 3.8, nearly 4 seconds after that pit stop cycle.
And it's not come through pit time in any specific way. Seems to be pretty equal across the board for all those drivers, so just keep an eye then on how they'll all be now saving fuel before what will be a bit of a splash and dash towards the end. Nicholas Hyder behind now, Thornton in the number 20, and looks to the outside, heading up on the exit, rejoining the regular, I call it, oval layout of Watkins Glen.
It is, I guess it is in some ways, isn't it, I suppose, as we see this battle in LMP3 Pro. Thought we were, taking a back seat on those for the next couple of moments because it was spread out, but certainly not. Look at this, free wide. Oh my goodness me. How is Gunter Thompson hold on to that? I've got no idea. He ducks out behind one of the Porsches, ducks back in front of Hyder again, defends into turn one. He's still in front. I've no idea how they all made it through there.
That was remarkable. I was making the comment earlier that you need to be thinking ahead. We're not thinking ahead right now. There was definite contact. Car slams into the wall. Not sure which GT4 was claimed a victim. It might have been Martin Crisp again.
Oh dear. His car is crisp for the second time, unfortunately. Oven baked, you could call it now. I don't know. But anyway, he's into the wall. And a real shame as well, to be honest, because it was real sense of urgency from the LMP3s, and almost too much urgency there, impatience you could call it, over the top of the hill. Certainly didn't want to wait behind for the next couple of moments, and then there's more contact here for Locke down here at turn 5. That's the outer loop, of course, but yeah, I mean, impatience, I guess that could be best described as from the LMP3s there on the run up the hill.
See what happened to Locke first, and there's a bump as you crest over into the outer loop, and maybe that's what happened to the BMW that of Lee Berridge that was leading the GT4 AM class slightly earlier as well. Just hit that crown in the road, and once you're on the ride, there's not much that you can really do from there, and it was an uncomfortable situation to be placed into.
I don't know what's happening to Ben Gregory at the moment, but I'm slightly fearful he's got damage because his lead is tumbling like you wouldn't believe at the moment. 1.2 seconds now, the gap, and something may have gone on, I'm not sure. Mike McFarquhar is the one closing in, by the way.
What's happened here is Ben Gregory went very, very long. Very, very long. The cars behind came in 18 laps ago and have been pushing on since then, and I wonder if this is just a slightly different strategy. We still have got to see the 75 back down to the pit lane in a couple of laps' time.
Okay. So he pitted early on in the race, I presume, with damage early on, that I've clearly misremembered. And Mac McFarquhar, who, he was on pole early, and I did think he had quite a lead, is just closing down. I guess that makes sense to be the case then. But still in second for the moment. Will Ben Gregory come in this time around? Is he close on field? No, not for the moment. Just maybe old tyres, I suppose, or certainly older tyres. I don't really know.
Gregory has just come out of the pit lane and is on a full tank of fuel and is getting himself up to speed.
Okay. interesting. So he's losing a lot of time at the moment, but Farquhar seems to be a lot quicker, and we could have a battle for the race lead in LMP3 very soon. We're approaching the halfway mark, and we're no closer really to figure out what's going on here in terms of strategy and where they might come out a little bit later on, because for now they're very close, but that wasn't the case even 10-15 minutes ago. So we'll see how it turns out in 45 minutes.
Still a ways to go before we get to the end of the race, and of course we've still got another pit stop cycle to come before that. This is a mismatch of the GT4 Pro and AM class, by the way, and you're getting a couple of little groups here. Jonathan Walker's just passed Gary McFarlane, and you've got Lee Berridge now trying his recovery drive in a fight for third place in AM.
Yeah, it's that spin, of course, in case you weren't with us, down at turn 5 for Lee Berridge. He was on pole in GT4 AM, led the way for a while despite the pressure, and survived under the pressure of Josh Boot for quite some time, but went for a spin after a traffic moment, but there wasn't contact. It's just a bit of a snap for him on the way in towards this corner here, the outer loop, where we of course have no chicane here tonight, just to aid overtaking that little bit, I think, and it may well have worked. He's back on the podium just for now, having gotten through on the Porsche just in behind. So that's Lee Berridge onto the provisional podium for the moment, but once again a long way behind Boot, and that once again increases the chances that there'll be more GT3s between himself and the race leader, and the championship and race leader will only extend his advantage with the way this is at the moment.
And of course, 6-round season, there's not really much time really, right? So that's something to keep in mind. 3 races down, 3 to go. You already kind of know where you're fighting, what you're fighting for, and who you're fighting for, and those will be some things just to keep in mind. You did say we might have a fight for the LMP3 AM lead. Don't necessarily think it's technically a fight, but Ben Gregory has conceded the lead for the time being, although we'll re-inherit it in a few laps time once the 75 heads down to the lane.
Well, that is true, but it is an exchange of places, I suppose, for the lead, and McFarquhar gets it back again in LMP3. Or LMP3 AM, I should say more specifically. He's currently second in the standings, by the way, only 4 points off of the championship lead in LMP3, as we've got King in the pit lane again. Well, surely that has to be damaged, because he wasn't expected in for another quarter of an hour at least. So
he had been out there for about 22 laps or so, so I think that might have actually been a scheduled stop, Ewan. Sorry, I don't mean to keep bursting your bubble.
Do you reckon?
Yeah.
Really?
22 laps.
I'm not sure that's correct, because I could have sworn King was in earlier on, but maybe I'm wrong. It's entirely possible. It's happened before. So that gives everyone a place. Taunton is up to second. Hyder, then Pryor. It's a train for second, really. Jürgen Frank now, he has an even bigger lead than before, but as we saw not so long ago, that may be down largely to the pit stop times that he and Hyder and others had over the course of that cycle. So maybe that's a little bit misrepresentative, but I do still think he's got a big lead. That is a big hole in the front end for someone. The Aston Martin, is that one of the Semper Racing cut? No, maybe not. It's one of the Aston Martins, everyone can see that, but it's missing most of the front of its car, and that can't be aerodynamic or helpful.
I think it's Adam Locke. It might well be who pulls to the side there. To go back, sorry, to Thomas King for a second. I just wanted to spool back my memory as well, because there has been so much that's happened, Ewan, that I do not blame you for slightly forgetting what's happened where. Oh goodness, that was Jürgen Frank, the race leader, up the inside of the fight for second in GT4 Pro. That's the type of race we've seen so far today.
Yes, it is. So, well, a very close moment for Jack Osborne. It's about to have a closer one, because Richard Simnor is very close to getting through now. Ben Palmer looks for a way past as well. The Mercedes thundering on down the back straight. Simnor goes from attack of second place to defence of third, but he's not going to get either. Around the outside goes Ben Palmer, and that will give him the inside at turn 6 here by the looks of things. Late on the brakes from him. And is it going to pay off this time? Yes. Last time he did that, he ended up connected with the Porsche Cayman and ended up very wide through that left-hander. This time, he stayed to the inside. He broke a little bit earlier, but still secured himself the place. He's back on the podium now.
They'll continue to fight for sure. We'll have to keep an eye on where they go from here. And and how aggressive they're going to continue being, because already they've lost another half a second or so as the 75 LMP3 car comes in from the lead back down to the pit lane. 41 minutes. That should be... The 75 can make it to the end from here. There may still be something on strategy to play, although we'll have to wait and see. Look at Jack Osborne, though, breaking away now slightly into the penultimate corner.
I don't know about you, but this race can best be described as confusing from a strategy point of view.
Well,
I don't really understand at the moment.
Go back to Thomas King, just because I wanted to circle back to that for a second. Don't forget he was involved in what we saw down at the boot where Corentin Gunes made the mistake.
That's true.
Yeah, so so much has gone on. Everyone is all sorts of out of place. And once again, we've got LMP3 leads, both in Pro and Am, above almost 20 full seconds.
Well, that is true. Guines was involved in that as well, by the way, and was involved in a previous incident back in Le Mans as well, as Gary McFarlane has stopped again on the exit of turn 1. As I mentioned earlier, was caught up in the lap 1 incident in GT4 and is now just stopped. Doesn't seem to be suffering with any damage at this stage, but he's just by the side of the road, not leaving the circuit either. Wonder whether this is a technical, given the fact that he's still in the race as we run up the hill now. I think this is Guy Edwards behind Josh Boot at the moment. I know he was around the GT4 AM leaders earlier on in the race, and I think he is still there. Josh Boot now leading by a much more comfortable advantage now, though, over 11 seconds. The BMW is going to find its way down the inside here and get through, but it's a bit of an annoying interference for Josh Boot, who is still leading by quite some way and can take things a bit more calmly than we saw in that battle earlier.
And like Ewan was saying earlier, don't forget GT4 Pro and Am are classified together for points, even though in the standings they are split up. So that pass has changed how many points they're scored, even though the ones next to the name don't change. I know it's quite confusing. We'll try and talk you through all of that. But now if you are Josh Boot, you're in a great spot, because Howard Hassan is, 10 seconds further back and is 3 places overall further back as well. That's some very valuable points, Ewan, especially given that most AM drivers would not traditionally be thinking, you know what, I could get potentially a top 5, a top 10 finish in the combined GT3 standings.
Absolutely, and that is sort of underlined by the fact that that he obviously gets 40 for the first position, but he's not going to get 40, if you see what I mean. He's only just scored over 40 out of 2 rounds so far, despite winning both times. So that's where the problem comes in for him. The only slight downside is the fact that the points do get only 1, but for a position further back you go. Just depends how far you fall in the GT4 overall, as Piers Pryor heads down the inside of Nicholas Heider and does get through into 3rd position. It was quite an aggressive move, and I didn't really think there was going to be a gap there for Heider to, Pryor to go down the inside there, but he has done, and Heider gets knocked down to 4th position. Piers Pryor getting into this race as it goes on.
Slowly getting back into the rhythm in this middle stint as well, where of course the short pit stop for Jürgen Frank has somewhat elongated the margin that the race leader seems to have, but it will be reverted back in time as Frank returns to the pit lane for a longer second sequence. These drivers only 2.5 off the back of 2nd spot, and with the delta in pit stop time between Jürgen Frank and those behind being about 10 seconds in the first stint, let's say that reverses once again. Ewan, does that mean the gap between Jürgen Frank and the rest of the chasing cars is about 10 seconds in terms of net strategy battles?
I would say so. The only problem is it always changes for the 3rd stop. So always what you think is going to happen, and this is especially the case at Sebring, always what you think is going to happen changes on the fly, which is annoying. But I think that is what we're looking at the moment. Although I would say that maybe that gap is even extending a little bit. I think Frank is still pulling that margin out to the likes of Taunton at the moment, and I think Heider has found himself in a bit of trouble here, really, because getting caught up in these battles has only cost him time. Whereas if he'd have had a slightly shorter stop like Frank did, he would have stayed in clean air and he wouldn't have got caught up in stuff like this. Right now he can't find his way past Pryor. Earlier it was the likes of Thornton and King as well that he couldn't find his way through on. Now that he looks to the inside again at turn 6, can't do it. If he'd have gone for a shorter stop, all this would have been avoided. Yeah,
and they're just costing each other time. And look how much they're defending as well. Go back, by the way, to the 75. Paul Clist has been passed by a car that's now charging back out on the track. And in terms of the times, well, after a full tank of fuel's been added, a 1:41.126 was the last time for the 75 machine. Class leader, 1:40.285. That's the difference, Ewan, in fuel load for these LMP3s.
It does play a very big role around any circuit really in these LMP3s, but right now Ben Gregory leads by a very long way, 36 seconds with 36 minutes remaining. There he is, last time around, continuing to hold on to that lead ahead of Salaputis in second. Further back in GT4 Pro, we're starting to see these guys almost resign themselves to second now. Eric, whether that's by design or just because they're fighting at the moment, Eric Grove now has nearly 5 seconds, and that gap has continued to get larger with almost every lap that they've gone through. Jack Osborne now the one who holds second place. Ben Palmer back to third, at least ahead of Richard Simnott.
These drive, I'm just trying to figure out. We said that they could probably come in as late as 20 minutes to go. They could come in as early as right around now. Would there be any benefit to coming in if you are one of these three and you think you could go faster? Because, well, there's been drama, at least now up towards the front, as a swap for second in the LMP3 Pro.
Wonder if that was through the outer loop there, everyone. Well, not everyone. The car in second for Gunter Taunton just getting in trouble with traffic, maybe, or maybe just on his own at the moment in towards the... Oh, no, it was traffic. Thought it might have been. It was at one of the GT4. Oh dear, it was worse than I thought. One of the GT4s in the wall in the background as a result of Matthew Gunter Taunton getting into the back of it, and that has not painted him in glory, unfortunately. You've got to remember always that despite that huge gap on corner entry, the LMP3s are so fast.
Okay.
And to be fair to him, I've called that wrong, haven't I, really? Because the GT4 has come straight back onto the racing line there.
I was about to try and stop you from digging your own grave because, yeah, that did look a little bit suspect. Let's ride on board. Oh, my goodness, on the live pictures, hellacious crash in through the final corner. But, yeah, I don't really know what you can be expected to do in that sort of a situation where a car slows down to an unnatural speed on the racing line.
I agree. I just didn't spot that first time round. Or second time, indeed. So I apologise. Let's have a look at the replay as to what happened there at the final corner. This is very... What on earth was going on there?
Is that a technical?
Well, I'm tempted to say so. Well, let's have a look here.
The Ligier's right-hand drive, so unfortunately we don't get the look at the wheel, but he's almost indicating like he was coming down to pit lane and then makes a mistake. I'm not quite sure what happened. As was there more drama in the live pictures because Piers Pryor's now lost some time. My goodness.
And there's a GT4 just in front of them as well, so I wonder whether that is related. But that looked very weird for Salaputis, I've got to say, into the final turn. Just looks like he made a mistake in taking far too much speed. There's Gergely Consabo around. Oh no, it's one of his teammates actually. It's not Consabo. He's running in fifth place, I should say, quite a long way back from these guys. Half a minute back, in fact, so it won't have been him. But one of the LMP3s around at the toe of the boot as well. Let's get to Piers Pryor first, though. One of the GT4s, one of the Mercedes just up in front here, and I wonder whether it plays a role slightly in the demise of Piers Pryor here from the lead at the time. Into the outer loop he goes. It's an outside run. Oh, he just gets it wrong. Not sure whether there was contact, but he certainly got loose and got into the wall.
If we look from up above as well, I'm curious to see if the GT4 tracked out a little bit, but I don't necessarily think that it did too much.
It did a bit.
It did a bit, but still, it goes to show that trying to go around the outside is a very risky play. It's riskier than when a DPI, an LMDH, tries to go around the outside of a GT3 car, because let's not forget, GT3 cars have a lot more downforce than their GT4 smaller brothers.
And all GT4 cars in the end do have to hold a tighter line than these prototypes, after all. And that's a real problem, in my opinion, that sometimes is not quite taken into consideration, I should say. Piers Pryor up on the jacks then, and this looks like it might well be a bit of a longer stop than he was hoping for, although he might just get on with it anyway. 24 seconds for him is fairly long. It's 32 minutes to go. and he's a long way behind Jürgen Frank. There he is, making his way up towards the outer loop for the moment. Only 25 seconds for him, so that kind of gives an idea as to how short the final stop for Hyder might be.
Well, again, I think we're still wondering if Pierce Pryor's longer stop was due to damage, because Ben Gregory, who has just come in for his final stop, 12.7 seconds, and is 13 seconds clear of that 75 car. So now, still waiting for Paul Joseph Kliss to make a trip to the pit lane. Still technically in a fight for second on the track for the time being. We're in that stage of the race, final 30 minutes, the strategy starting to converge.
It is. Ben Gregory back to the lead again, but Matt Mafakwa now 13 seconds back. That's a move down the inside from Kliss in third, and then there's a long way back to Ward in fourth. Denise Pope a lap down in fifth. Salaputis will be making repairs and is doing back in the pit lane. So look at what happened here too. Is this Weitz in the 17? He goes, it was indeed. He goes for a short half spin there from third, but he's now back to pit lane for his final stop of the race. Nicholas Hyder still leading by 1.6 seconds, and that is as a result of the pit stops so far. Further back, Ben Palmer's back to second again, actually. Late on here in GT4 Pro, late on in the stint, I should say. He's taken that second place back again after losing it about 20 minutes, half an hour ago.
Ultimately, it doesn't really matter who leads now. It's only who leads at the checker that's going to matter. I still feel like Richard Simnor's biding his time. We saw being a bit more aggressive in the first stint, just trying to stay in front of Jack Osborne, but Osborne was able to get the 2-for-1 earlier and took advantage of the battling between Palmer and Simnor. It's all just allowed, though, Eric Grove in that Aston Martin to be very, very comfortable in pulling away at the front. There's only one other Aston Martin in the top 10 in the GT4 class right now. It's not necessarily the most popular choice for the pros, but Eric Grove's definitely got the most out of it.
And it's Eric Grove leading again, by the way. He's leading the championship. His nearest rival, Michael Havliderson, is down in 11th place. Even further down is Matthew Crisp in third in the standings. Then you get to Simnor and Osborne to round out the top 5 in the standings. There is Ferguson Hausler, by the way. We've barely seen him today. But I think he got caught up in the lap 1 incident and has been a lap down ever since, down in 11th, and that'll be even further down when he count for the AMs that he'll be behind as well. So the gap between himself and Grove will only extend. I think both GT4 categories now are starting to see an obvious championship leader emerge in the form of the 2 race leaders we currently have.
I think that's what happens as well, right? You get halfway through a season and no matter what's happened to everybody, ultimately the favourites start to get shuffled towards the front. It's now just about the momentum that you carry in through the back half of the campaign. It's why sometimes we talk so much about it with the drivers, you know, that crucial M word, and sometimes the frustrating M word. What will happen though, Ewan, if you've had a slightly frustrating start to the season, is even if you're not fighting for a championship, you feel like you need to sign off the season with a high. You'll be wanting to grab victories, but you can't do so while potentially inserting yourself into a championship battle.
People seem to have split opinions on this as well, not in terms of spectators watching, because I've got to say, from my personal perspective anyway, I enjoy it, and well, then I wouldn't go as far as say enjoy it, but I don't like it when people don't get involved because there's a championship fight going on, for example, which is sometimes a problem that NASCAR has in its final round these days, but anyway, that's a different discussion. I don't mind at all when a championship contender is involved, but you see a lot of pre-race interviews when there's, you know, a title on the line in whatever series it is, whether it's in real life or in sim. You see, I don't really want to get involved in the championship fight, and I do get it from one perspective, because you don't want to take out a championship contender and be the person who did that, because that gives you a lot of unwanted publicity, I suppose. But even so, you know, you're all entitled to be there, you're all entitled to race, and you would race the championship contenders on literally any other day. So I don't quite understand the point of view myself.
You raced in the Precision Racing League GT3 Series last season, right? A couple of races. You didn't do the full season, unfortunately. I didn't get to roast you as much as I wanted. But did you see what happened in the final race of the GT3 Sprint Championship?
I ran it, well, I was Sprint Championship, so I thought I was going to get a chance to say the fact I run in the top 10 of a league for once.
There you go, you managed to work your way into there. After your top 10, you had to go to sleep because it was quite early in the morning for you in the UK. But what I was going to say was, we had a case, penultimate lap, two drivers fighting 1 and 2, separated by 1.5 seconds with a championship on the line. They're coming up past lap traffic. What does the lap traffic try to do? Pull to the side of the track and stay out of the way. What does it do inadvertently, though? Dips its right tires into the grass, spin around, and take out the leader who is on their way to the championship. It's just the moments like that, right, where no matter if it is intentional or not, a driver that gets involved in that sort of a situation will always feel rough. And I think that's the lens from which I kind of look at it. When we talk about something, let's be real serious, right? The British Formula 4 Esports Championship, for example. That's a different situation, right? That's where team games come into play, because you want a teammate maybe to win the championship. Here, I think you're just trying to stay out of the naughty books of the rest of the community.
I think we saw, in terms of teamwork, by the way, to win championship, I think we saw that quite most obviously in, what was it called? Is it Skip Barber iRacing Formula Series or something along those lines? Yes, if you saw that, you'll know what I mean. Because there was certainly teamwork at play there. And by the way, how terrible would you feel, by the way, if you were the driver who span in front of the leaders and caused an accident like that? I would quite literally never recover. I nearly never recovered from hitting someone off in a random mid-table race when I was running second last. Anyway. You know
the worst part? You know who spun?
No?
Nick McLaughlin.
Oh dear, was it?
Yeah, so one of the series admins, and the fortunate thing was the other driver, credit where credit's due, Carl Modoff, I'm going to shout him out by name, on the final lap, on the run to the checkered flag, allowed the other driver to retake the win and to take the championship as well. That's what good sportsmanship is all about.
That is above good sportsmanship. Wow, that is quite remarkable. So fair play to him. But yeah, you'd still feel terrible, wouldn't you? I would. At the end of that, goodness me. Oh dear, this is close. This is GT4 Pro again. Ben Palmer has got into second place with 25 minutes remaining, and further behind, Richard Simnor is trying again to go through. This time it's down the inside at the heel of the boot. That was quite aggressive in the end, actually. Osborne forced to back out of it, but it was just as well that he did, because if he tried to head round the outside, he was not going anywhere. Into third place then for Richard Simnor, and Osborne has lost a couple of places now in this stint.
This has been a really different stint as well, right? Because with the traffic being a lot more separated out, it's been a lot more frequent. You haven't had those pauses where you'll have traffic be quite frequent for a while and then not have it maybe for a couple of laps before it returns once again. This is the type of traffic where you've always got to be thinking about what's coming, what's in front of you, and maybe you're going to be 3 wide down through turn number 1 with 2 LMP3 machines.
That is not what you want to see, side by side in front of them, but they're not bothered about that. It will be looking in the rearview mirror for Osborne, or for Simnor, I should say, because Osborne is there. There's Ben Palmer in the 111 Mercedes. How long is his pit stop going to be? It's going to be shorter than his first one. That's much is obvious. 19.1 is the number we'll have to remember. Now, are those, did he come in at the limit of his fuel, or are those able to push on a bit longer, or did he decide to come in early there? What I'm asking is that pit stop going to be longer than the pit stop of these two in the Porsche? Because they are in different manufacturers after all.
Remember,
and I wonder whether they can just run a bit longer on fuel.
They were all about the 35-second mark, though, in that first stint, so I feel like they're all pretty equal in terms of the fuel window. The only difference is now going to be for Ben Palmer, crucially, what did I say earlier? Strategy might come down to if you come out in clean air or not. Look how much clean air Ben Palmer's got in front of him.
All the clean air you could want. Although behind him he has got one of the BMWs briefly looking down his inside, nowhere near close enough to be affecting him for now. So Ben Palmer in the ideal situation, and arguably Simnor is as well. Towards the end here, Osborne has really fallen away. And by the way, the car just behind Palmer here immediately into contact with Piers Pryor as he tried to make his way through. He's in search of a podium here this evening, by the way. Currently, oh no, he's made second bit of contact there as well, I think.
Was that contact or was that a mistake?
Not sure from that angle. We'll find out.
That was definitely contact.
Yes, there's no arguments about that one. What about this one around the outside here? Oh no contact there, excuse me. So, sorry Piers. he makes his way around the outside, and it was fine, but unfortunately for the BMW, just a spin as Osborne comes in.
And as I thought, Simner had been hanging back for parts of that middle part of the race, and now is the one that's going longest of them all. And so Porsche hits the mark in the box. And again, what was the number that Ewan wanted you all to remember? 19.1 seconds. It's 10 and a bit and counting as Osborne sits and waits as Palmer dives out of the final corner.
He's rolling quite early here, Osborne, so maybe it'll be close, or maybe even going his way. 17.1. Osborne clearly either taking more risks on the fuel or just able to put a little bit less in due to the way that their situation was working. It's very close. In fact, almost too close to call. Osborne keeps his position, though, and that's great news for Simner, arguably, because you'd imagine that the 21 car starting in front of its fellow Porsche will be in front before anyway, maybe even take a shorter fuel stop, and now they can fight as well. Ben Palmer was in clean air briefly, but not any longer. Are they going to work together or fight? It looks like Palmer has taken the decision to wait behind, or has he? Down the inside into turn 5, they will fight, and Palmer will get through.
And I think that was actually an important slingshot as well to be able to slide on through. They need to work together. Looks like Simner may have lost a bit of ground on this lap, actually, maybe with some traffic playing its part. But it is all going to come down to moments like this, whether these drivers can work together to continue to battle their way on forward. And a fight, by the way, between drivers hunting for podium spots right now. It's Thomas King, 14 laps into the run. Kunshabo, 19 laps into the run. Both still owe us a pit stop.
Yeah, both odd strategies, though, or not scheduled strategies, not planned strategies from these guys. And that has created this fight for third. Frank should be leading on the exit of this pit stop cycle, by the way. Whether Thornton and Pryor are going to be second and third remains to be seen. I think Hyder's going to get into second, but his last stop's going to be quite late. Maybe one of the later ones, possibly apart from these two. But Frank has already made his final stop, so he doesn't have to worry any further. I don't even think Hyder can even afford himself a drive-through. Maybe he can just about do a drive-through and keep the lead, but not much more than that. He's going to lose the lead to Jürgen Frank, and now he comes in.
Right on cue, isn't it? And so now we'll get a good sense for what this gap back to the 20 to the 22 is going to look like. And of course, all of these drivers have really been involved in plenty of fighting. Jürgen Frank, yes, has been on slightly different strategy, but regardless, I think it's just been more by virtue of being at the front and not having to be as physical in the fighting that's allowed him to really break away, and Hyder should come out comfortably, probably in net second, still waiting for King and Kunshabo, of course, to make their pit stops. Haven't talked about the GT4 AM leader for quite a while, but Josh Boot heads off to the boot section in 5th in combined GT4.
He's well placed to drive at this circuit, the GP layout, but up there in GT4 overall, continuing to put cars between himself and Lee Berridge in second place. And that's only going to give him more points at the end of the day. Going into today, of course, he had 17 over the rest. That's going to extend to well over 20, I would argue, at the end of today. And it does feel like already that's turning into a sort of unassailable lead. It's not going to be mathematically done, probably not even towards the final race, to be honest, because of the way that the points work. However, he's probably going to force one of his rivals to have to win the overall GT4 race at this rate, despite being AM drivers. It's a very comfortable situation he finds himself in.
Yeah, no, it's a nice position to be in as well, when you feel comfortable enough to just ride behind the pro car and just continue to punch in the laps. It's a nice little stint that's being extended out here as well. Boot was one of the last cars to come down to the pit lane in the first cycle of pit stops, and so with Lee Berridge, the next AM machine, a further almost 25 seconds down the road and on the same strategy call. It's been a very, very impressive drive from Josh Boot. I also do kind of wonder though, Ewan, this first half of the season, Sebring, Circuit de la Sarthe and Watkins Glen, Monza, Spa and Daytona, I feel like in terms of setup bases, those last three tracks are all going to be actually quite similar in terms of setups. And so if you're going to be fast at one of those races, I'm assuming you're probably going to be fast at all of them. This is a good indicator as well. Watkins Glen is quite bumpy compared to some of those other tracks, but I get the sense that some of these drivers are feeling quite confident into the closing stages.
We're going to get a great idea of where people are at that next race at round 4. It's going to give us a really good chance. Not only are we going to have 2 rounds left only at the end of it, but we're also, as you say, going to have a great idea as to what the baseline setup is for the rest of the season, arguably, even though Monza is a lot more straight line speed, well, quite a lot more straight line speed focused than Spa is, which does have its high speed nature corners and so on. Not that Monza doesn't have those either, to be fair. So, it's a baseline that you can build on over the course of those final 3 rounds. And the fact that there are only 2 rounds at the end of that race as well does play into the hands of those who do well at round 4. Nicholas Heider has come out in second, and he's 11 seconds behind Jürgen Frank. Thomas King is still third. Consabo still fourth, as you say. But I think Thornton and Pryor are going to take over from that. It really remains to be seen where Christoph Weitz is going to find himself, but there's the top 5 in the bottom right of your screen. Jürgen Frank's not had a lot of airtime today, despite being the leader for quite some time. He's had quite a big lead, though, for quite some time as well.
The scary thing is we have actually taken a look at some scary moments with Jürgen Frank. Let's not pretend that he has not made some daring dashes in traffic, and it's been really exciting as well to see that even though he's leading, he knows when to make those kind of opportunities happen. Oh goodness, the fight for second in GT4 Pro has ended badly for Jack Osborne.
Well, he was down the inside of Palmer, didn't work out for him. He's back to pit lane now as well, unfortunately. He was down the inside. Does he drift up into the Mercedes? That's a close one to call. That's a very difficult one, I would say. He backs it into the wall. The Porsche clearly with enough damage to warrant a pit stop. He's on the inside here. Of course, he's got his car a long way alongside as well, but it's late braking from Palmer. To be honest, he was squeezed a bit there, was Osborne.
I mean, you could also see that he had pulled in front on the run in towards the corner, and it was just on the commitment on entry that the Mercedes pulled alongside and then, I think you're right, tried a bit of a squeeze. That all is music to the ears of Richard Simner. And as Eric Grove heads down to the lane, have we just got to the very end of the fuel window? Porsche's peeling off to the box as well. I think we're about to see an Aston Martin and Porsche leave the lane 1 and 2 in GT4 Pro.
Got to compliment the organisers, by the way, for keeping the change in fuel that we initially had for only Le Mans now extended for Watkins Glen as well, because it's provided us with a little bit more difference in terms of strategies for these drivers here today. I know the early crashes and stuff have put people out of position as well, and that could have happened before, but even so, it's been very interesting so far. Eric Grove has taken on a little bit more fuel than I think he needs there, just for a little bit of security towards the end here. Richard Simner certainly didn't. He's got a 16.5 second pit stop that should see him stay out in second. Ben Palmer surely can't take over that position despite all those battles, but he's going to get fairly close. Not close enough though, I'd argue. Simner should be fairly comfortable there.
No, you can see Simner's already off and away on the lane, and really clattering over the curve is Palmer, and visually a much bigger separation this time by as we scamper up 110 odd feet of elevation and to the site of what, not for the first time in World Sim Racing history, was the site of lap 1 drama at Watkins Glen. To be fair, Ewan, what we had didn't trigger a safety car, so that was probably a plus.
That's true, but even so, it was quite chaotic at some points here today. Josh Boot's going to have an even bigger lead here now, by the way. Lee Berridge now into the pit lane for his final stop and will come out miles behind Boot. I thought initially that you were right. Boot was, we were on the end of the fuel limit there, but it turns out not, because Boot's actually leading at the moment. What is going on here?
Eric Grove has come out directly behind Josh Boot, and again, remember, if Boot finished here, he would get maximum points across of both GT4 classes. It's what makes the point system so intriguing, even if it's a bit hard to follow with how they're scored on that left-hand side of the screen. But yeah, Boot clearly able to go that 1 lap longer and will come down for what will be an even shorter pit stop. Berridge came out in what is 10th overall GT4. I get the sense Boot's going to be looking at truly a top 5 finish here today as he leans to the right and heads down towards the lane.
That was a dangerous moment for Eric Grove, but he dealt with it very well, and so continues in the lead and now takes the overall lead in GT4. Josh Boot in with nearly a minute to play with. Lee Berridge shouldn't get anywhere near this lead now. and will stay behind. The battles are further behind. Christoph Weitz only just got ahead of Consabo there, and that is the last stop of the day for everybody. Has King come in? I think so. No? Oh, no, he hasn't actually, has he?
19 laps. God, can he make it to the end? Surely not.
So. No, I don't think so. I think he'll have to come in again. The incident was on that first run through traffic, wasn't it, with Guinness, and that was only about 10 minutes into the race, so surely it's going to be too far for him. It's going to be a very light splash at the end, and kind of depends where he comes out, but I think it'll be behind Pryor and ahead of these two in 5th position, possibly.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Have to wait and see. How short a stop is it going to be? Because that will be the definition of a splash and dash, right? Everyone has had a proper second stop in this race for the most part. And that will be the proper jump into the pit lane and get out as quick as possible. Not going to see the move really in toward the outer loop. Going to have to also pick up something that's happened to, well, former GT4 AM leader Lee Berridge in that boosted motorsports BMW M4 GT4 out of the outer loop, seemingly tidy, and then down into the boots, and something's going to happen. Oh!
Way too fast into turn 6 there, and straight into the wall as well, so that's not going to help for the final 11 minutes. I think at this stage in the race, with that kind of damage as well, you're more likely to just soldier on with it really, rather than come into the pit lane, especially since final stops have been made and so on. But it's still not ideal, and still pretty annoying as well to drive the last 11 minutes of this one with damage.
Yeah, and it's just a clumsy mistake as well, and could tell that Berridge was pushing the balance of that BMW. Again, the first incident that we had I thought was a little bit confusing, and now that I remember there's a bump on the crest just before you head off into that corner, it explains a little bit more. But Ewan, we saw how close that field was, right, in the first 10 minutes, the GT4s. You can tell they're all having to push to be able to hold on to the draft at times as well.
They are. We mentioned the draft is going to be important and has been important throughout today. We've mentioned the lack of aerodynamic downforce for these GT4s, and that can't be helping through some of these corners at Watkins Glen. Johannesson is trying to make his way through here. Happily, Johannesson on Adam Locke, and that's the sort of what was Falcon livery on the inside. It's not got any banners on it, just looks like one, and holds on to 8th for the moment. Johansson looking to stay out of the way really of LMP3's coming through. Maybe a sensible choice after some of what's gone on today, and that's helped Adam Locke enormously actually. Held on to now a second lead, and Johannesson just staying out of trouble really rather than trying to get the place desperately, although Locke will now suffer with a bit of traffic through the final corner.
I mean, at the end of the day, Ewan, everyone knows that when you see an LMP3 car, you should get ready for the visit from the dentist. And does anyone like a visit to the dentist?
Well, no. No. Yeah, so a few have certainly had an examination go wrong today.
Yes,
sorry.
That indeed they have.
What do you call it? Medical complications?
Yes.
There's been a few of those.
Medical malpractice, I think, has been what we've seen today.
Malpractice. Thankfully, I've never encountered any of those in my life. Anyway, 9 minutes remaining in the 90 here at Watkins Glen. We're coming to the end of round 3 of the World Sportscar Championship here for 2023, running all the way to the start of December and the end of the year here on iRacing and RaceSpotTV. Still plenty coming up, of course, and still 3 more rounds of this one to come. Jürgen Frank leads the way. Over 10 seconds worth of a lead to Nicholas Hyder. This lead has been almost as large as this, if not bigger, for quite some time now. In fact, throughout most of the last stint, it was over 20 seconds. The rivals who are not his teammates and not Christoph Weitz are more than half a minute back by now. Even third place, or provisional third place, Thornton is, 29 seconds back at this stage in the race. So it's a very large gap at the front of LMP3. The only questions remaining there really are in AM. Ben Gregory, can he make it or not with 2.8 seconds over Mafako? I'm going to guess not, but while he's in the lead, it is still pretty tense.
Gregory has actually got more fuel in that car. 75 has been out on track for 20 laps and counting. Well, that's
I think I got that.
You got that flipped around. Yeah, no, you flipped that around. But now I had been pretty calm in thinking both first and second would be good on fuel to the end. And now suddenly you've got it in my mind that maybe we're not that good on fuel in this car.
Well, I certainly had question marks over one of them when they came in for their final stop earlier, because I do remember it being very early, and I thought even a GT4 would struggle to make that, never mind an LMP3. So one of them, I think, is in trouble. But while the gap is like this, it does still feel quite tense here. And Gregory, once again, as is what happened at the end of the second stint, I believe it was, the middle part of the race, is being chased down again quite rapidly. And if they both can get to the end here in 7 minutes, Gregory's going to have some defending to do, because he's in this sort of helpless position again. We saw this, as I say, at the end of the second stint, almost looked helpless to stop the overtake from happening, and it's sort of happening again, or it looks like it is. And
Gregory's not even in that deep into the run to where maybe tyres would be burning off. But again, it was a very short stop for Ben Gregory, so maybe that's part of how things have played out. We haven't talked about weather conditions, so let's take a look at them. Oh, it's not too cold out there. It's only 48 degrees Celsius on the track, Ewan, which means that the tyres that they're all running on at this point in the race are going to be very, very old. And there's the answer to the question. 75 off to pit lane.
Did I just do him scrape the wall as well?
I think that was someone else who scraped the wall, but your eyes were pretty good, don't worry. Oh, ears rather.
Yeah, ears. I can
mix your senses there.
Hear well with my eyes or whatever.
Yeah.
That was a scrape on the wall. I'm sure it was. Mac McFarlane just come in. 6 minutes to go. That's going to be, what, 3 or 4 laps he's putting in. It's always frustrating when you have to do that. And King is going to have to do that as well. And Thornton too. Well, I wasn't expecting it from him. He's into the pit lane again for the third time, and that's a surprise from him. I thought one of the GTR red cars could have made it, and I thought it was him, but clearly not. Is he just driving through? It looks like it. Maybe a drive-through for off-tracks. It's kept King the place, though. Was that even intentional? They are all part of the same team, Pryor, King and Thornton.
That could have just been the incident penalty there, and a drive-through as a result of that. I believe it's every 24x that you get the drive-through, and plenty of these drivers have been involved in contact. And speaking of contact, as Hyder just slipped off the road, well, it doesn't stop at Watkins, does it?
It certainly doesn't. Well, it certainly hasn't today. What a bizarre race in some ways that we've seen. You are right, by the way, so a 24x for a drive-through. That I think that may have been. Let's see what happened to Nicholas Hyder here on the way in towards the toe of the boot. It's a very deep run in, and a little bit of a, well, I was about to say harmless hit on the wall, but it probably wasn't. It was fairly sizable. And 17 seconds now, the gap. Is that gap for second going to come down? He's got quarter of a minute nearly, so I reckon he'll be okay over the course of the last 5.
And there's a couple of things now that we still have to keep an eye on as well. There are plenty of pockets of battling. 6th and 7th in the LMP3 Pro. That's Whites and Kunshabo still fighting. 2nd in GT4 Pro, where Simner and Palmer now split by just a car length and a bit. And of course, Josh Boot in the GT4 AM lead is in 5th overall and being chased down by Guy Edwards. Several drivers will be looking to solidify some good championship points here today.
And they're all on the line here at the very end, especially when you're inside the top 10 of either of the categories. The points difference is at least 2 for the most part, so there's plenty to be won with a overtake late on here. So through turn 5 goes Guy Edwards. He's no longer, he is near the leaders in GT4 AM again, isn't he? Because that's Josh Boot straight in front of him, isn't it? In 5th place overall. I mean, what a drive again from Josh Boot. It's really, I guess when you look at these races, it's really obvious why he's got the lead that he has, because he keeps getting good overall results in the end. He's 30 seconds ahead of Berridge, and once again he'll be putting heaps of points into the rest. It would be well over a 20-point championship lead by the end of today. Looks like Josh Boot's on his way to another race win in GT4 AM, excuse me.
And again, it's what you said there. It's the AM driver getting good overall finishes that makes a strong championship charge with the points format that we have. That's the key thing to keep an eye on. And Josh Boot, halfway through the season, looking very, very assured in his speed so far. Teammates going to go side by side as they wrap themselves towards some lap traffic in the class. It's King going to be pushed out wide, or rather doing the pushing out wide and holding on to the position. These two, they know what rule number 1 in racing is, right?
Well, clearly they're observing it to not a very thin degree, if you like, because it's quite close between the two of them. I did wonder, by the way, when Goodyear Thornton had that drive-through a couple of moments ago, that he was maybe giving points over, or the team were maybe giving points over to who they thought was best, because Pryor, Thornton and King are all part of the same team, even if they're not scoring points. You know, it's GTA Red and GTA Pink, but apparently not, because they are fighting pretty hard between themselves for 14th position. A couple of points on the line either side, although Thornton looks like he maybe has the run now and has the speed to stay ahead. He at least has a second over the others, as Richard Simner's going to have a battle on his hands to the end here as well. Ben Palmer has chased him down for a last lap overtake, or at least that's what he hopes it's going to be. I think Jürgen Frank is just in front of them there, isn't he? He's going to start his last lap very soon.
Yeah, I think we are about to head off onto what will be the final trip around at Watkins Glen International, and you can see a bit wide there for Simner. Opportunity open for the Mercedes to try and now switch back underneath, heading off to that penultimate corner, but it's going to be the drag race out of turn one. Ben Palmer's got to just get on the throttle and push it all the way to the floor.
So just over a minute remaining, and one chance really here for Palmer to do it. Up on the curve through the final corner, the white flag is waving. One more time around Watkins Glen, and he's so close in the Mercedes. Simner has to defend a little bit, but it's not enough. Palmer still switches to the outside though. He doesn't want to go for it into turn one. He instead wants the run here up the hill. It's never a great thing though, because you just find yourself a bit stuck on the run up through this section. Through turn two they go now. He gets closer still. Palmer gets closer through turn three as well. He'll be tucked in the slipstream as much as he can from that much smaller Cayman just up in front of him. Now he'll have a peek to the inside. Surely now it'll be at the chance in towards the fifth corner, but he's got a teammate of Simner right in front of him. A lapped car getting involved in giving slipstream. Palmer's going to go down the inside anyway though. Here he goes on the inside of turn five. It's side by side between them as they go into the boot section of the circuit. He tries to squeeze out Simner and he manages it, getting past the lap car as well. He's through, but not for long.
And it's still fighting as Piers Pryor joins the mix. There'll be three wide. Mercedes losing the momentum, bobbling on the grass, but now cambered in uphill climb into the final sections of the middle sector. Palmer tries to get the momentum once more as the race comes to a close at the front.
Jürgen Frank takes the race at Watkins Glen after 90 minutes of pure demolition of the rest of the field. He'll take it by 18 seconds over his teammate in the end, in a sensational day for Sim RC. Over the line for the rest as well. It's going to be Ben Gregory who takes it in LMP3 and Eric Grove in GT4 Pro, but who's going to finish second? There is the number 200 for Pure Sims Esports, Eric Grove, with another win and a next championship lead extension in GT4 Pro. Further behind, Simner's going to take it. It's Ben Palmer who nearly dives at the final corner. He just ran out of time in the end.
It was a really fun battle. The lights flashed from both sides to show how much respect they have for one another. But goodness, the margin that Eric Grove built up was all through the strategy in the first cycle, and after that they fought behind and peeled themselves away from the Aston Martin.
And in GT4 Pro, there's no surprises here, because Josh Booth is going to take the win by more than half a minute in the end. In fact, I think it was last week, or it was at Sebring, one of the races, he managed to win by a lap in his class because of the way that the lapping worked. Of course, he wasn't that far in front in reality, but even so, a really big gap to the rest all over again. Gives him 32 seconds pretty much on Lee Berridge, who is still racing out there towards the line. It's going to be quite a close finish here between a couple of those LMP3s. Don't think they were on the same lap though at the end of all that. By the way, King had a late pit stop there on the penultimate lap of that race, and so will drop down in the results that we're about to see here after the 90 minutes of racing here at Watkins Glen tonight. There is Berridge going over the line, by the way, the final driver to cross the line. He finishes second in GT4 AM. In LMP3 Pro, though, it's Jürgen Frank, because it was always going to be, by nearly 18 seconds ahead of his teammate. Piers Pryor ends up on the podium for the second time this season, with Mathieu Goodyear Thompson and Christoph Weitz rounding out the top five. Kögli Consabo was a few seconds back after their battle. Thomas King come out in seventh after their battle towards the end, after only 5 laps. Corentin Guinets became the first retirement from, and only retirement actually, from LMP3 Pro. In LMP3 AM, it was Ben Gregory by nearly 30 seconds out of Matt Farquhar after that late pit stop. Paul Joseph was over a minute back with Toby Ward and Denise Pope, 1 lap down. Jörg Buurmeister got out there again after 8 laps worth of repairs during that race. Nicholas Salaputsis retired during that final pit stop phase. Anton Oman and Andy Booth retired a long way before that. In GT4 Pro, it was Eric Grove by the smallest margin of the 4 classes. Richard Simner and Ben Palmer battled to the line for second as we enjoyed. Christopher Smith and Guy Edwards got up to 5th after the incident to Jack Osborne, who finished down in 10th. Andy Schill recovered to 6th after an incident in the first stint. Paul Zanatucci gains 3 places on the day to finish 7th, and Paddy Faulkner, the final driver, on the lead lap. Michael Hafliderson-Hausner is going to drop from 2nd in the championship after finishing 9th today. Jack Osborne finished in 10th. Jonathan Walker was also a lap down. Matthew Crisp, Johnny Saty, Jaroslav Sebula and Rafael Dražas couldn't make it to the flag. GT4 AM, of course, was won by Josh Boot. Lee Berridge was the only other driver on the lead lap. Howard Hassan and Philip Bjork and others getting lapped, of course, by the leader, Jürgen Frank. Matty Wild rounded up the top 5 with Jack Wilkins, and RaceSpot's own Paul Smith with a very respectable 7th place. Adam Locke, Jeroen Kaiser and Evangelos Navasas has finished in 10th position. The final driver to finish, Haflidy Johansson, in 11th. Gary McFarlane and Caleb Ruddock round out the 13 finishers. 13 drivers, at least, in GT4 AM. We're now joined by Jürgen Frank, the overall race winner after 90 minutes here at Watkins Glen. Welcome in once again, Jürgen. Good to have you with us. A race win and a new championship leader as well, which is, of course, yourself after that race. Tell us what it was like with battling the traffic around here at Watkins Glen and just negotiating that hour and a half.
Yeah, good evening, and thanks for the congratulations. The race was, traffic-wise, it was very hard, especially with those fast corners. When you get the traffic there, then you have a 1 second loss or something. And we had plenty of GT4 cars on track today, so the track was full. LMP3 cars, I didn't see that many this time, but I had enough to do on the track.
Certainly, and I mean, we spoke about that before the race actually as well. Does it affect you at all as an LMP3 driver, seeing the fact there's less people in your class but still quite a lot in GT4? Does it factor into your thinking at all pre-race?
Yeah, maybe a bit, because or actually I check which of my championship opponents are there, and obviously it's because of the lapping of the LMP3 cars, that comes also to play. So it's always interesting to have a smaller grid or a bigger grid.
Yeah, it certainly was. And by the way, speaking of championship opponents, you are now leading all of them, of course. Congratulations, Jürgen, on the race win here tonight at Watkins Glen, and thanks for chatting to us as well.
Yeah, thanks, and thanks for broadcasting. Also thanks to my teammates who did a great job, and the double win. And I see Niklas Heid is also here in the TeamSpeak now, so have a nice evening.
Absolutely. SimRC having a very good day indeed. Jürgen Frank there from SimRC taking the win for LMP3 Pro. Well, Arjun, it was a very good race in the end. Thoroughly enjoyed that, but possibly the most traffic focused, definitely the most technical circuit on the calendar this season. I wouldn't expect to see a race like that repeat itself over the course of the remaining 3 rounds.
You say that, but Ewan, you're off to Monza in a couple of weeks' time, to Spa after that, and to Daytona after that as well. Good luck. You'll have no voice come December the 5th. That I can probably promise you.
Well, I'm willing to stick by that and guarantee it, but I'm prepared for being proved wrong. As you say, 3 weeks' time will be when we return, and our schedule running all the way up to, of course, the start of December for the World Sportscar Championship this season. A big thank you to everyone who's been watching here, RaceSpotTV this evening. It's Jürgen Frank, the overall winner tonight from Watkins Glen, and all of the other class winners as well. Congratulations to them. I've been Neil Leary alongside Arjuna Kankipati for this one, and for now, this has been the World Sportscar Championship for round 3 at Watkins Glen, and until we see you in 3 weeks' time at Monza, it's goodbye for now.